Hi there and welcome to Help Solve the Case. My name's Christine Burke. You may know me, you may not. I'm a retired detective and sergeant. I am a current forensic genetic genealogist, creator of the program Genetic Genealogy for Law Enforcement, which launched in 2021. Across the nation, I've been training our law enforcement agencies and working on forensic genetic genealogy cases since then. And I wanted to come on and just provide a little commentary on this snip from Channel 13 News in Tucson, where Sheriff Nanos talks about the DNA investigation and other components of the Nancy Guthrie case. I know for many of you, like me, this case is near and dear to your heart. So is probably forensic genetic genealogy, this new technology that we have. And so let me play what the sheriff had to say, and then I want to discuss a couple things that he mentions here, and give it to you from my perspective. We'll just leave it at that.
About the investigation and the chances of you all being able to find Nancy Guthrie.
Well, these cases are difficult. And it's not just this case. A number of our cases come to us where it requires a lot of work from other people. It's not just a detective goes out there, talks to somebody, and we can make an arrest. This is a very sensitive case, but what really makes it prolonged is we do rely on labs for the digital part of this case, which is very critical. Labs for our DNA.
Okay, so I wasn't going to interrupt him, but I'm afraid I'm going to lose my train of thought if I don't step in here. So it's interesting to me that they're still talking about technology labs, because cell phone extraction is pretty quick and pretty comprehensive. So my cop mind is turning here, and I'm wondering what they're up to, because they're doing something. For him to bring that up makes me, I don't want to say like not suspicious in a bad way, but he brought that up. And yes, there are a lot of, before we get to the DNA, there are a lot of hands and people that come into play, especially on a sensitive, high profile case. And let me tell you, I am not a big fan of law enforcement relying on third-party vendors because, and we'll see what the sheriff talks about here, that's where the big oopsies can happen. When you have external vendors that are not used to law enforcement protocols, okay? So that has been my goal, as I mentioned, when I started Genetic Genealogy for Law Enforcement, to bring this capability 100% in-house, and I work on that every day. Even I would be so happy that I was not in business anymore if this came into law enforcement hands, because coming as a cop, that is where it belongs for a multitude of reasons, okay? Because every potential person involved in the case could be a potential problem. I don't want to say like it leaks, but it's a break in the chain of custody, the whole case. And, what did they say? The cook's in the kitchen, the more cooks in the kitchen or something like that. So that's just my personal experience. And we've seen it in cases. But yes, when he talks about tons of people are involved at this high profile case, okay, we've got the FBI supervisors, whether you believe it or not. We've got prosecutors, okay? We've got potentially legislators. I mean, all kinds of people are involved in this, including what he's referencing, these external vendors. And that is, it could be a recipe. It could be, with all these cooks in the kitchen, could be a recipe for disaster. And as I continue this, we're going to see his hesitancy, he's being very circumspect about what he says. And I appreciate what he says because it is important. So let me let it continue. So he's talking about technology, which I think is interesting. I wonder what they're up to, right? And there's a lot that goes on that you guys don't know about, okay? So that's interesting. Okay, now he's going to move on to talking about the DNA.
Which is also very critical. But when you're looking at those labs and the work they do, you have a science there. And science has rules that it has to go by. Even though it's not DNA, they'll tell you, is in an exact science. It's 99% plus.
So that's interesting what he says there, that DNA is a science. So is he talking about, in the forensic genetic genealogy, is he talking about the science of extracting and separating cells? Is he talking about getting the DNA out of the hair, this hair that we heard about? What science is he talking about with his 99%? Because that's interesting to me. My investigative mind is trying to read through the lines and interpret what he's saying. So, because, and this is going to be a little controversial, forensic genetic genealogy, people are going to say, cannot be 100% on an ID. With his 99.9%, wherever he's getting that. I don't know if he wants to talk about STR and CODIS, which that number, I don't know where he's getting that number in the science, okay? Because it's not typically expressed that way. Except, are you 100% confident, like talking person to person, are you 100% confident that you have the right person? That's I'm 99.9% sure to me, okay? Because I know how I talk to my law enforcement agencies, right? Like I'll say, I'm 100% certain, okay? I'm 99.9% certain there's this little doubt, but I'm 99.9, okay? And that is when I talk about the genetic genealogy part, the identifying the person of interest from their family. So they could also be talking about ethnicity. They could be talking about family of origin, like, but yes, forensic genetic genealogy uses scientific principles. And I will say, look at the Gilgo Beach case, okay? That it is now, and I still need to go over that pleading, that court order, but it's been accepted as an identification method, right? I was talking to somebody, not to get off tangent, I was talking to a doctor, and he was trying to tell me how DNA was wrong and how identifications were wrong. I'm like, all day, every day, let's go, right? Not meaning to embarrass him, but I'm like, let's go. Let me show you how it goes. And I will tell you how I know how confident I am. And how am I confident? Because I've been through it in so many cases. Because I've been through it in my case. Because I've found people that don't exist in the DNA. I know what completely messed up DNA looks like. I know what low volume DNA looks like. Okay? I've dealt with it all. I've dealt with very quick investigations and I've dealt with very short investigations. But you never give up because the answer is right there in the DNA. You have to read it and you have to know how to work it. That's just the way it is. Okay? So I don't know where his 99.9% is coming. And let me back up a bit because he's talking about doing things properly, which is a whole different area here.
You have a science there. And science has rules that it has to go.
I also want to say, no disrespect to Sheriff Nanos. I don't think he knows anything about forensic genetic genealogy, which is okay. because also yesterday I was talking to a retired sheriff because I love staying in touch with law enforcement leaders and, current and retired, and seeing how we can move this forward. And he didn't even know what it was. Okay. And this was a pretty go get 'em type guy, sheriff. He didn't even know what I was talking about. All right. So that's interesting too. So I believe that, like most police agencies, believe it or not, they do not understand the process. Again, not to toot my own horn, but this is why I started my company. This is why I started my mission, because they have to know it. They have to use it. Just like APHIS, CODIS, NIBIN, this is it. This is the next frontier. And we need to start using it more, and we need to secure it and safeguard it and bring it in-house. But, okay, so I don't think he understands, and I'm not saying that in a negative way. I don't think he understands it from end to end to be able to articulate it. But he's talking about these rules and stuff. So the DOJ is involved. So that means we have to follow, they have to follow. I'm not on the case, although I've offered. They have to follow these DOJ guidelines from 2019, which are very restrictive. They're very restrictive in my opinion, and they certainly need to be updated. And that in many cases can present more problems, and their guidelines can present more problems than help. And that's my professional opinion as a law enforcement officer, previously law enforcement expert and forensic genetic genealogist. Cash Patel, if you want to talk to me about those interim guidelines, please do, because you're doing our agencies a huge disservice here. Anyhow, so that could be what he's talking about. He's going to mention the Constitution, which may be coming from the Koberger case. And I will tell you, there's a huge misconception about privacy issues related to forensic genetic genealogy. And there's also been some legal scuttlebutt about terms and conditions with database access versus laws and what's legal. I also want to mention too, because many people think that the FBI does forensic genetic genealogy, and they don't. That their lab, okay, they don't. To the last time I spoke to somebody in that area, they don't have that capability. So yes, the lab portion of these cases, the extraction to get it to the matches, like when you take your ancestry test, your MyHeritage test, whether you swab your cheek or you spit in the tube, the process to get it from there to the matches in the computer database, that is a capability that has to come from an external lab now for whole genome sequencing. But the forensic genetic genealogy, that is done in various places. It is done in, as I might have mentioned, I was talking to a different investigator yesterday about, sorry, I posted that on my X, not on YouTube. I was talking to a different investigator yesterday about coming in on a case that they have a lot of endogamy, which is interrelated individuals. And another one, they have a certain ethnicity population that they've been struggling with. And I said, I'm happy to look at it. Okay. But they were doing the forensic genetic genealogy in the police department, but are not at that level, not at the level that I'm at. Right. And so they said, can you help us? Can you come in and help? And that's super awesome to see. That is my goal. We need at least one forensic genetic genealogist in every police department across the United States. That's why I train civilians too. This is going to be a new job, 100%. And I say that as a retired detective and a supervisor in, law enforcement management, right? Like, you got to have this. It makes absolute 100% sense from a case integrity and a cost savings, get stuff done standpoint. So let him continue here. Back up.
And the work they do, you have a science there, and science has rules that it has to go by. Even though it's not DNA, they'll tell you, is in an exact science. It's 99% plus. So it's pretty close, but you still have to follow rules. They have protocols, because you don't want to jeopardize not just the integrity of this case, but the integrity of DNA as a supplement to law enforcement work.
Yes, and I 100% support this. And there has been, and if you don't believe me, call me and I'll show you. There's been some nasty, rotten cheating in this industry. If the public knew what was going on in this industry, it's absolutely disgusting. In an ethical, what is supposed to be an ethical, I swore an oath, an ethical industry, the ends do not justify the means, or the means justify the ends, or whatever that person said. There's been multiple cases where there's been shenanigans, and it has to stop. And so if Sheriff Nanos, I don't know who's standing up for this, but it damages all the damage that has already been done. And I say this from a defense attack capacity. The challenges are already on the books. If the defense knows where to look, the impeachment evidence is already on the books. And they say, what is that? The horse is already out of the gate. So we cannot have any more. So I 100% support what he's saying. Can't have it. Stop doing it. Police work, integrity is job one. Integrity is job one, and it takes as long as it takes to do it right. The case does not end with the arrest. The case ends with a successful prosecution and a case that can survive appeals. No reversible error in any part in that process. And yes, this is my soapbox. This is why I'm doing this, because the public doesn't know and doesn't understand what has been going on. And to get a little gold star on your resume about you solved a cold case, it's just unacceptable, because that's not who we are. Unfortunately, we've seen it, but that is not who I walked beside and swore an oath to and risked my life for all the public and everything. That is not what I signed up for, and I will not support it at all. So I 100% support what he's saying here.
And to be honest, take it to the other side, the criminal justice process. We have rules we have to go by too. Constitution, laws, things of that nature.
I think I know what he's talking about here. And again, I'll go back to, he doesn't understand forensic genetic genealogy. But he could also be talking about, I don't want to try to get into his mind, but yes, not only does it ruin the case, but it ruins the integrity in the criminal justice system. And we do have Fourth Amendment search and seizure. Look at my Brian Koberger about the broken plea in the Brian Koberger case and the Franks challenges. Look at that disgusting testimony about what they did there. And we cannot have this information suppressed under Fourth Amendment challenges and due process challenges. We cannot. And I'm inspired by the Gilgo Beach case that this is not just a tip. And I'm sorry, but a tip has to be done properly. This is an identification method. It is a serious science, and it should be. It is not a hobby, and it shouldn't be treated that way. And so, yes, there are ramifications. We need an ethical police force. We need an ethical criminal justice system, and we need to operate within the rules. We need to restore justice, and accountability. Accountability is a big word too. We need to restore that. So he's absolutely right, because it only takes one case. Like I said, defense attorneys, the information, cops, my cops, the bad information, here we go. You really should take a look at who you're contracting with. And if you want the answers, feel free to call me. I'm always here. Okay. Because you could lose your case by hiring the wrong vendor from a defense challenge, because the information is out there. And that's my opinion as a law enforcement expert and what's out there. So caveat emptor, buyer beware.
Rules of the court, those all guide us. And so if I were to say there's a positive to this, it is that people are working, doing their best to stay within those rules so that they have that understanding that, look, nobody...
Now this to me means potentially that they have a very low population or they have a lot of endogamy. Okay? And that they're having challenges because there's no rules. There's no rules about a mixture and separating a mixture, right? DNA is what it is, right? And I'm not a biologist. But there's no rules. You either have it, you're able to separate the profiles and do something with it, or you're not. Those aren't rules. Okay? There's rules about, not rules, but scientific standards about, naming conventions. How many profiles do we have? Are we going to say it's a mixture of this, it's a mixture of that, or whatever? But that's not a rule. It's not a rule. I think he's talking about the guidelines, the DOJ guidelines, which I already talked about. But yeah.
Wants to arrest the wrong person. We want to make sure that DNA.
Let me tell you, the DNA is the DNA is the DNA is the DNA. So you either have somebody, okay, you identify the person. Okay, there's two stages to this. You identify the person, and then you look at the activity. So I'm standing behind the ID, okay? Unless you've got multiple profiles at the scene that are related, whether it's brothers that are cousins that are suspects or whatever. I'm not casting any aspersion on anything else, but just think about it. A father and son could go out and commit crimes. Two brothers could go out and commit crimes. Two sisters could go out and commit crimes. Mother's daughters could go out and commit crimes. And that has nothing to do with being related to the victim or anything like that, okay? So if you've got family in potential suspect profiles, that could be an issue. Then you have to separate who belongs. Okay, so we got the ID, because the DNA will tell you who it is. Hands down, no disputing, folks. No disputing. Then you have the activity. What were they doing there? Should this DNA be there? How did it get there? Okay. So.
Doesn't just identify a suspect. It also exonerates those who are innocent. So it's a tedious process, we get that, and especially when you add in all the other complexities of...
So what did he say? Complexities? Hold on a second.
Just identify a suspect. It also exonerates those who are innocent. So it's a tedious process, we get that, and especially when you add in all the other complexities of one DNA on top of another and the separation of that, and it's...
Okay, so there he's talking about mixtures, okay? And going back to who has a right to be there and who doesn't. You've heard everything. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So...
Just it moves at a snail's pace, I guess, for some. But for my investigative team and for me, we look at this as, no, this is doing exactly what we need it to do, and that is keep...
So I think what he's saying is that the public feels that they aren't doing their job. If you have, and I don't want to say issues in forensic genetic genealogy, you have typical things that you see. You have mixtures, which you should not have in a hair. Okay, just throwing that out there. But you do have mixtures. And then when you output the sample, which should have been done long by now, you should be even able to, unless they've got a really convoluted mixture. Again, we don't know because they haven't told us, which is fine. How many profiles they have. Is it interspersed with family members? Okay. But let's say that hair, okay? If they output it and then there's a very low population in the GEDmatch database or the FTDNA database, they're working at, very, 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 very distant cousins. They could have a lot of endogamy. The matches like the DNA, do they have male DNA, female DNA? I could help them. We should already know the ethnicity. We could have known that at STR. I don't even know what they've done with it, but it can take a long time if it's someone unexpected, if it's not somebody random, and depending on how many profiles are there. Like it just, the DNA should be easy, and I say that with all respect, but it could take time if you've got distant cousins that you have to work with. Like I said, people in the database, and that could happen for a number of reasons, which, based on what I heard, could be possible. But there's ways to work around that legally, ethically, morally. So I don't know.
Looking, keep working, use the technology, work well with our other teams and partners, the FBI,
So, did somebody not come to a conclusion and they're having to farm it out? Okay. I talked to another investigator, said, well, I get a lot of cases that people can't solve. And this other investigator was talking about, well, we sent it here, we sent it here, we sent it here, we sent it here, we sent it here. All right. I'm used to that. You just have to look at it with a different perspective. And that's also why I believe having a law enforcement, no disrespect to all the people that do this work, out of a desire to help. You just have to have a certain perspective to know how to look at things, and you have to know how to work the system in the right way and how to get what you need and how to get the information that you need legally, morally, ethically, and just get it done. But that's from decades of investigation. So
DPS, the labs across the country, there's several labs working on this. I feel comfortable knowing that we have.
So I don't know if he's talking about forensic genetic genealogy, the matching there, the building the family, or if they're talking about the mixtures. Okay. We just don't know what he's talking about. But I think that, when you're in crisis mode, people should come to the table, and you should allow people to come to the table. Just like all the civilians are providing tips, right? You never know where that one particular lead or idea or theory is going to come from. So more is better as long as you protect your case.
Some of the brightest minds out there working on both forms of evidence, whether it's the digital and the cameras and what that shows us, as well as the DNA and biological.
Okay, so they are trying to get, I told you, they're up to something with the digital evidence and cameras. All right, so that's good. Let's say a prayer for them. Let's say a prayer that we get something on this case that's useful. The same with the DNA. Let's say a prayer. It only takes one match, folks. You know what? You watching me could be the key to breaking this case and not even knowing it. If you moved your DNA and or your relatives, if you haven't tested, because it takes, 8 weeks, but you are your relatives. If you move your DNA to FTDNA and GEDmatch and opt into law enforcement matching, you could be the break in the case. Not that you would know it, but you could be the break in the case. It only takes one match many times, okay? And it doesn't have to be a big match. So I would urge you, here's my PSA, please, please, please consider moving your DNA. Please, please, please consider if somebody reaches out to you with an unknown human or a criminal case, please consider helping. That is what moves this forward. It only takes one match, I'm telling you. So please, in your true crime communities and talking amongst people, if you've taken a DNA test, please move it today. I'll put the information below how to do that, a link in the description. But if you haven't taken a DNA test and you love fighting crime, then put yourself in the pool, baby. Okay? Take a test, move it. I would say do whole genome sequencing at MyHeritage, download that puppy and move it over. And I'll put the instructions how to do it. But you guys can, it only takes one match to clear a case. I solved a 9-year case with one match. That simple. Okay? We can do this together. We can get this done.
Definitely. So, I mean, that was kind of my next question, was talking about the DNA, because that has been a big topic lately of discussion. Obviously, you kind of went into having to go through the different, DNA that was found. That was something that you talked about very early on.
I'm watching him
from inside of Nancy Guthrie's house. So, when it comes to where they're at now, are they still trying to... is there anything that you can share if they're still trying to separate the different DNA, or if they're just,
I think what I can share with you is this. The labs are working with labs all across the country. They like any science, they consult, and they're working close with the investigators, my team, the FBI, and I think they're making progress.
Okay, so he didn't answer the mixture question. So they're working with investigators. So that tells me they've got matches. Now, high-level matches, low-level matches, confusing matches. Every match is a lead. Like I said, you could break the case. It only takes one match. So, sounds like they have something.
But, like I say, they're I don't have the expertise to talk about.
There we go. Yes, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And no disrespect, okay? And this is why, if you're a law enforcement officer that's watching this, you have to bring this in-house. You have to understand what you're paying for and where the pitfalls can come.
How that works, but I would just say we know the experts do, and they are working hard to get this case resolved, and I think every day they get closer. But it is a science, and there are rules that the science...
Okay. So they're building and they don't have enough population, and they're confused. That's just, I have no idea. That's my gut. That's my gut.
Must take and follow, as well as there's rules of evidence and rules of court.
And they don't have the population in the databases. Which is interesting. Because I know what ethnicities are in those populations. But I know how to get more population, so I wish you guys would call me. But let's just pray for them, okay? Let's just pray for them.
And that we need to stay as guardrails. Keep you.
Don't cheat and go in the other databases. But we can get matches.
Focus, but keep you on track so you do a very solid investigation.
Absolutely. You obviously had also mentioned, the digital side of going through all of those cameras. We heard about that very early on in this investigation as well. Obviously, tips also were a huge thing. The tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of tips between PCSD and the FBI that you all have gotten. The last time that you and I spoke, you kind of talked about that. You really had to weed out those tips and kind of, hold on to them. Is it kind of trying to find both, with the DNA and then also maybe the digital forensics or the tips that you have to, kind of piece?
I'm watching body language.
Piece that all together. Are there tips that you guys are just holding on to? Tips still going through?
Well, first of all, we're still taking tips. We want those calls. We want, if you see something or you know something or you hear something, we need you to call us. We know somebody out there knows. what happened here. We
Yeah,
need those
somebody
calls.
does know.
But in the same sense, we still make a push for it if you've got video. And you know, I know we're 100 days beyond, but maybe you saw something the last week that concerned you. And if you've got a video that was just what you're seeing didn't set well, call us. We'll take a look at it.
That's interesting. That is very interesting. That's very interesting. So what wouldn't sit well 100 days later? The actual suspect acting weird around the family, confessing something. It wouldn't be some random thing, right? Because there haven't been any other abductions in the neighborhood, right? Interesting.
And we'll keep it. And what we really are doing with the thousands of video images, we catalog them. Today we may have a video that involved a red car, and last week it was a blue truck, or all of those things we catalog so that when we do identify a suspect, we can sit down and say, well, this individual owns a green Toyota station wagon, whatever it may be. And now we can go to all those thousands of videos and look up just green SUVs, station wagons, and maybe we can match it. So
Absolutely. So it just all can.
it's connecting all the pieces.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know.
So I got triggered by the slip there with the sedan. This gets my mind going. Freudian slip. Yeah, so he said, so when we identify a suspect, that they're building a database of vehicle images. So they could match it up to see if the person was actually in the area. I don't know what to make of that.
Also early on in the investigation, just, I'm trying to look at this, as a whole over the 100 days. That you all had worked closely, of course, with the Guthrie family. Is that a continued?
Day one, we worked with the Guthrie family, but we also worked day one with the FBI. We continue to, I'll let politicians be politicians. All we want to do is solve the case. That's our job. The Sheriff's Department here is here to solve a case. All the rhetoric, the white noise, we just stay out of it. We just put our head down and do the job.
Absolutely. And wanting to just do the job, the word cold case continues to be floated around with this investigation. You've been asked about it, and you have already talked about, obviously, that you even have investigators that their sole purpose is to continue to look into cold cases.
Absolutely.
How do you see this investigation? Do you see it as cold yet or not?
No, absolutely not.
So it's not cold because they're actively working the DNA. So it's not cold. And they're taking tips, and they feel, I don't know, but I'm guessing by what he's saying, they're actively pursuing leads. And it is only when you have nothing left to go on, it becomes cold. So he's right.
There's way too much work to be that is ongoing with some of the physical evidence we have, and we're not going to give up on it just because it's been 100 days. We can.
So he's saying what's true here is that there's no timeline. Oh, after 30 days it becomes a cold case. No, it becomes a law enforcement labeled cold case when there are no leads. When the detective says, boss, I did everything. And I have nothing left to do. And then they also bring in other people. They will have a task force, and they will have a meeting, and everybody will go through it, and they all have to say, we got nothing. That then is a cold case. Okay.
Continue to work with our labs, whether it's on the digital end or the biological end, DNA, and we'll continue to do that. We continue to work with the FBI. And we continue to work with DPS in several labs across the country to get some resolution on this case.
So DPS, that's interesting. That's interesting. Whether they're extracting for STR, maybe they just handed a little bit out to everybody. I don't know. I just wonder what's left. I don't mean to chuckle, but it's like what's left? How much did they take? And what's left? Handing it all out. I don't know.
Over the last few years that I've spoken with you on different cases, even, you have always talked about maintaining the integrity of the investigation, whatever it is, and you have definitely mentioned it with this specific investigation. Is there any information that you all have that you are not sharing for the sake of the integrity?
Of course there is.
Well, I think in every case we do that. But it is really about, securing the rights of all of those, to include the accused. And we just, I've been doing this for almost 50 years now. We don't try our cases in the public media forum.
So don't name a suspect until you're 100% certain.
Just don't. Everybody has a right to a fair trial.
He's also talking about potentially, prejudicing the jury, right? So if there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of stuff going on, a jury pool, as they call it, could be influenced, right? Because ultimately it's going to be tried in the Tucson area. They're going to be influenced, right? The question that the jury gets asked is, do you know anything about this case? And how do you get a clear jury pool from that in the Tucson area, let alone the world, right? So that's what he's probably, again, I can't read his mind. I'm just telling you what I'm thinking about as he's talking.
And so I believe at some point in time, we will make an arrest on this case, and whoever that individual is, that individual will have a right to a fair, impartial trial.
Which is true.
And that starts with my team on the ground, how they handle every piece of evidence going forward. And so I know there's a lot of white noise out there, but I would just say this. My team's done this for decades, and they've always been successful. We'll get there.
Absolutely. I mean, as you discuss, as you've brought up the white noise, I mean, obviously, we recently got a statement from you all about just comments about the work between PCSD and the FBI.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that about the interagency conflict and whatever, but that seems to be where it stands. Things are still moving. It is not a cold case. I don't know if I helped you clarify at all anything about forensic genetic genealogy. As he mentioned, he's not familiar with the technology, so it sounds like they have multiple areas of potential evidence. They've still got convoluted mixtures. They're trying to separate people out. It sounds like it could be, and again, I have no idea. I'm speculating. They've got low population. They've got low matches. Like I said, please move your DNA. I'll put my the link of the how-to down at the bottom. And we have to pray for them for integrity, for the fortitude to keep going, because as a detective, it can be very defeating, especially with a lot of public pressure, and you want to get it right. And believe me, people are crawling down your back to get it right. And so we pray for our officers, we pray for the family, we pray for everybody involved. And we also pray that that people that know something will come forward. That just to do the right thing. Like Savannah said, do what's right. We have to do what's right. And most importantly, in my opinion, we need to know where Nancy is. End of story. As a child, I cannot imagine not knowing where my mom is. And to me, obviously we want a successful prosecution and all that, but we need to know where Nancy is. And somebody knows where Nancy is, or somebody has an idea of whatever. And if you, the person, just let us know where Nancy is. Forget about the money. Forget about all that. Just let us know where Nancy is. That's the least you could do. Everything else can maybe be forgiven, whatever. But just let us know where Nancy is. Thanks for being here. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope it's been informative. I would love it if you would like, subscribe, and share. And let me know down below if you have questions, what you would like to look at. If you want to be trained in forensic genetic genealogy, reach out to me. We've got a lot of classes. We've got our Investigations Academy, where we work through live cases, looking at it from the police perspective, why they do what they do, what departments are involved, like all the way from dispatch to detectives and court, looking at it from the police perspective and the defense perspective. Okay, what gets you in trouble? Exactly what Nanos is talking about in this video, as a learning lesson. Okay, we're not here to badmouth, but it's a learning lesson, because we know what gets challenged, we know it gets thrown out, and we want to be better. We ultimately want justice for everybody. So if that's of interest to you, please feel free to reach out. Thank you for being here, and I will see you on the next one.